Now, story number 3 this week. Apparently, lots of us are planning to spend a future inheritance that we receive, but very few of us are actually having conversations with the person that might be giving us that inheritance. So, this was research from a law firm called Stevenson's. And again, they spoke to a lot of people. It's robust research. 48% of people haven't spoken to close family members about inheritance plans, their inheritance plans, but 50% expect to receive an inheritance, and 40% of those have already worked out how they're going to spend it. And this is something we come across as financial planners on quite a regular basis, which is my financial plan is my parents are going to pop their clogs and I'm going to receive an inheritance and it will all be okay. And that is not a financial plan, I have to say, particularly if you haven't even had the conversation. Am I in your will? You know, who else is getting the money? Is there going to be any money left? Because in many cases, these people don't know the detailed financial situation of their parents, particularly if their parents end up going into long-term care, residential care. That money can quite quickly be spent and disappear, leaving very low inheritances or virtually no inheritances behind.
You are exactly right. And actually, the first thing I was going to bring up is the cost of care. Because if you're not aware, and I'm sure plenty of listeners are, it is absolutely extortionate. So even if you think, you've got a relatively world class, what am I saying? Middle class, mum and dad, whatever, you're the only child, you should really get some money coming to you. That's kind of logical. Maybe you've even talked about it. Pinning your hopes on that is incredibly foolish. I'm going to give you
Mm,
some stats that I found. So the average weekly cost of living in a residential care home is £704, which, by the way, is nearly my share of the rent on my London flat for a month, just to give you some comparison. While the average weekly cost of a nursing home, which I think is the one that slightly
mm.
more kind of needs more care, is £888 per week. Per week.
And that's
I,
the average as well. You wait till you look at the cost of care down here in the southeast, in Surrey, in London. It's eye-watering figures. We're talking, tens of thousands of pounds a year gone. And some people will live in a care home for many, many years. So you can see, you combine that sort of length of stay with the cost of stay, and inheritance can get wiped out very quickly.
yeah, it totally dwindles. And as well, a lot can, I mean, I think it is good to have these conversations. Clearly, it's very, very awkward. And the last thing you want as a younger person is to be coming across in a way that, you're trying to get your great uncle's millions or something bizarre like that. I think it has to be a respectful conversation, and it's not
Mm.
about demanding anything. It's not about expecting anything. It is simply about legally, where do we stand? And I mean, in my opinion, it's always up to the person that's giving the money away. They might
Yeah.
decide that they want to give 100% of it to a cat charity, which is completely their prerogative. It's their money. Then they don't even know it's their children, as far as I'm
Mm.
concerned. But it's a really tricky conversation to have, and it's very, very awkward. But even if you've had that conversation, there can still be unforeseen things that mean that it's a dreadful
Yeah.
plan. Somebody could remarry, and that could drastically alter the will. You might have some enormous family falling out where, people are suddenly cut out from the will. You might have a sibling that dies or something
Mm.
really, really dreadful. And I'm sorry, that's a really dark example. But as a result, you suddenly find yourself actually better off than you thought you were going to be. I think it needs to be a continuous open dialogue. And I actually think if you have one, because obviously not everybody does, but if you have an advisor, maybe speaking in the room with them takes away that
Mm.
kind of, money grabbing aspect that older
Yeah. Yeah.
relatives might be concerned by.
We've certainly found that in the past. So it's where it's been difficult for clients to have conversations within their families. We almost come in as a bit of a mediator, and take the heat out of the conversation, take the emotions out of it, and say, look, we're trying to understand this from the perspective of your financial plans and how they all mesh together. But you're right, circumstances change. There's no guarantee. Firstly, there's no guarantee at the age of which parents are going to die. We're all living for longer. We know life expectancy keeps climbing. So actually, that inheritance you're expecting to pay off your mortgage before you retire may not come through. And examples like the Queen and Prince Charles. I mean, if he had been waiting for an inheritance from his mum, she's still going, and he's now, I know, in his 70s, maybe older. It's examples like that, I guess, that increased life expectancy, increased longevity means that you can't count on an inheritance at a certain time. I also found very interesting in here this research how people have already mentally planned to spend their inheritance, and it was 20% are going to save the money, 15% are going to pay off some or all of their mortgage, 11% are going to invest it, 10% are going to move home, 9% on. It was really evenly split between all these different dreams and objectives, and I think until it becomes a real tangible thing with a date, that's very dark, but when you know it's going to happen and you know the detail, you know what split you're going to get, you know what the value of your assets are, until you know all of that, it's probably quite foolish to start mentally allocating the money to different things and different dreams. It could
Well, yeah,
completely.
I mean, I did think when I read that, well, do you know when they're going to die? Because it might be that you've actually already paid off your mortgage by that point. So you've suddenly got all this extra money that you didn't
Mm,
even account for. Or, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think people shouldn't be spending money before it's literally in their bank account anyway. I think that's just good kind of common sense, unless
mm,
something is very, very certain, like it's a salary or something along those lines. And even then, you've got to be careful of that. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't suggest people start planning what to do with their inheritance, because for so many people, particularly young people, hopefully it's so many years away that it would be really, really silly to suddenly
yeah.
turn around and go, I'm going to buy a new car now, because actually in 40 years or whatever, you'll probably have a car already. You might have a completely different set of needs at the time. But I'm actually interested, so as a financial planner, then how much weight do you give to inheritance in part of a
Yeah.
financial
you,
plan?
you can model it as a scenario and say, if this happens, this is what it would mean to your lifetime cash flow. And that's healthy enough to do that. But you'd never put a specific date on it and say, you have to rely on this happening then at this level, because there's so many variables that can change between now and that happening. Yeah, so it's a scenario you can look at, and you can say, if it happens on X date and it's X amount, then you could do the following and not run out of money before the end of your life. And that's what the financial planning process for us is all about. It's about this lifetime cash flow modeling that we do, or forecasting that we do, but based on so many different assumptions. And you have to make assumptions when it comes to inheritance, unless you, and again, it gets dark, but unless you have a terminally ill parent who's disclosed all of their financial assets, you know exactly what you're getting and when you're likely to get it. If it's a short term thing, yeah, you can allocate it. You can say, this is how I'm going to spend the money. But if it's at some point in the future, I might receive some amount of money, I wouldn't count on that. I wouldn't put it in a financial plan at all.
No, I good. Okay, good. Because I never think I never consider inheritance as something that should be relied upon. I think millennials, I mean, the great transfer of wealth really is going to come from baby boomers to either younger Gen X's or millennials sort of around my age and a little bit
Mm,
older. And it will be a huge transfer of wealth, an enormous amount of money is concentrated within that particular generation that in theory will on the whole die before the younger generations. It would be a
yes, yeah.
weird world if they figured out how to live forever. um, but yeah, I just hope that my contemporaries are not banking everything on inheritance, because while I think a lot of people, I mean, depending on what your financial situation is, you can think you might get something
Mm,
eventually, but you won't know what that is. You won't know what your needs are at the time. And I think it's much wiser to figure out where you are in your own finances and your own earning capability and all the rest of it. And anything you get on top is a nice bonus. And I would
yeah.
leave it there as far as I'm concerned.
No, very sensible indeed. Hannah, thank you for joining us again for this episode of Talking Money. As always, you can find show notes at icradio.co.uk, useful links as well. And if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, please do press that like button, subscribe, and follow along for more content. But Hannah, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you very much.